So today, we're going to talk about something called demisexuality. It's an identity that really makes you rethink our basic ideas about attraction. We're going to look at the challenges that pop up, not because of the orientation itself, but because it exists in a world that just, well, it operates on a totally different clock.
I mean, really think about it for a second. Have you ever looked around and felt like everyone else is just sprinting towards attraction and relationships while you're kind of just waiting at the starting line? That feeling? That's right at the very heart of what it means to be demisexual.
Okay, so let's get a clear definition on the table. Demisexuality is a sexual orientation, and it's on the asexual spectrum. For someone who's demisexual, sexual attraction isn't a choice, it's not a preference. It's an involuntary thing that only switches on after a really strong emotional connection has been built. If that bond isn't there, the attraction just doesn't happen. Now, to really get the challenges here, you have to understand the world that demisexuals are trying to navigate. And that world runs on something called allonormativity. It's a big word for a simple idea. It's the widespread, usually unspoken assumption that everyone feels sexual attraction right away all the time based on a first glance. This is the cultural backdrop, the default setting that creates so many of the problems we're about to get into.
All right, let's dive into the first major hurdle, the really broad societal pitfalls. And it all starts with just being invisible and deeply misunderstood.
So this is where things get really tricky. Because demisexuality doesn't fit that normal model, it often gets mistaken for a medical problem, like hypoactive sexual desire disorder, or HSD. But the difference is absolutely crucial. HSD is about a lack of desire. Demisexuality isn't about a lack of anything, it's about the conditions needed for attraction. The desire isn't broken, it just needs a specific key to unlock it, and that key is an emotional connection. And this confusion just fuels so many harmful myths. People write it off as a moral choice, or say you're just being too picky, or they'll assume demisexuals are just prudish, which is completely wrong. The sex drive can be super high once that bond is there. But probably the most damaging one is the idea that it must be a response to trauma, which just completely invalidates it as a real, inherent orientation that someone is born with.
And this isn't just an anecdotal thing. The numbers really back this up. A shocking 72% of demisexuals say they feel misunderstood even within LGBTQIA+ spaces, places that are supposed to be safe. And on top of that, 65% feel invalidated by their own family and friends. You can just imagine the profound sense of isolation that creates.
Okay, so let's zoom in a bit. We've talked about society as a whole, but now let's get into the world of dating, where the friction from these mismatched timelines becomes really, really personal.
Modern dating culture, especially with the whole swipe right world, is built for speed. It's all about that instant spark, that immediate physical chemistry. But for a demisexual person, that's just fundamentally not how their attraction works. So an allosexual partner might see that initial lack of sexual interest as being put in the friend zone for good. And then if attraction does show up later, they get totally confused and it can feel like a really disorienting bait and switch.
In this timing mismatch, it almost always leads to something called sex drive discrepancy, and the emotional fallout is huge for everyone. The demisexual partner feels this constant pressure, this anxiety and guilt, like they're not enough. Meanwhile, the allosexual partner can feel rejected, unwanted, and start to think the problem is them. The end result for both people is often resentment, feeling disconnected, and a real hit to their self-esteem.
And all of this pressure cooks up this incredibly frustrating psychological trap. It's a true catch-22.
See, on the one hand, the absolute non-negotiable requirement for attraction to even begin to grow is a feeling of emotional safety and trust.
But on the other hand, what does the pressure of modern dating create? The exact opposite: intense anxiety.
And there it is. That's the catch-22. The pressure to feel something right now creates an anxiety that completely poisons the very emotional safety needed for attraction to grow in the first place. The whole environment designed to create a connection ends up strangling it before it can even start.
So with all that going on externally, what's the internal cost? This brings us to the deep psychological toll of just not fitting in.
When you live in a world that doesn't work the way you do, you start to internalize it. You're constantly asking yourself, am I normal? What's wrong with me? It leads to this constant self-doubt, this pressure to just go along with physical intimacy before you're ready, which, of course, just leads to guilt and distress. And over time, that all builds up into this state of chronic loneliness and just pure emotional exhaustion.
But, and this is a really important but, it is not all pitfalls and distress. let's shift gears and talk about resilience and about the actual strategies that can help build much healthier, more supportive relationships.
Because successful relationships are 100% possible. It all starts with making that deep emotional connection the main priority. That means you have to communicate clearly about your needs and your pacing, right from the beginning. And maybe most important of all, it requires patience from both people, a real shared understanding that this kind of attraction is a slow burn. It's a gradual thing that you just can't force.
And here is a fantastic example of what that clear communication can actually sound like. See, it's not a rejection, it's an explanation. A simple, honest script just like this one can set expectations, it can build trust, and it creates the very emotional safety that's needed for attraction to maybe eventually blossom. And that really leaves us with one final thought to chew on. You know, understanding demisexuality isn't just about validating one specific identity. It's an invitation for all of us to ask a much bigger question. What if our entire culture just slowed down a little? What could all of our relationships look like if we learned to value the depth of an emotional bond more than the speed of an initial spark?